Good evening. I'm Cheryl Pemberton with the Mid-Continent Library, and what you're looking at now are a few slides of upcoming programs, some virtual, some in person at our branches, but Camping 101 is coming up soon on June 11th, 12th, and 13th, and we will be, if you're looking for an inexpensive vacation for the summer, you might want to join Camping 101 at one of these three branches. Missouri Float Trips is going to be done at 4 of our branches this summer. And one of them is a hybrid program. The program at Colburn Road is actually is going to be done live with a virtual component. So if you don't want to get out, you can register for the Colburn Road location and you'll be able to watch it from home. Summer Waves, we have an artist that does basically step-by-step painting. I believe that's next week. Yeah, next Wednesday. So if you want to get your paints and brushes and palette, whatever you need to get painted, you can follow along. We actually record the program. So if you don't have all your equipment by then, you can watch it later on our YouTube channel. Oh, and then coming up, and that is next week also, Exodusters and the Story of Nicodemus, which is a town in Kansas that was settled by former enslaved peoples, I believe. And someone, I believe they're from the National Park Service, is going to talk about Nicodemus. So I'm just going to run through these slides. That one kind of reminds me of this Summer Waves, that famous Japanese print of the tidal wave. It kind of reminds me of that with a little more color. And Missouri Float Trips, this one's kind of interesting. This is your this program is being presented by Brent Frazee. So and I want to introduce you tonight to Becky Franklin. Becky is a licensed professional counselor and owner of Hands of Hope Counseling and Support. She's been a therapy provider for over 20 years. Her specializations are coping with life transitions, exploring core beliefs, and grief support for children, teens, and adults. Becky is passionate about reducing the stigma surrounding mental illness and sharing inspiration about being a lifelong learner. In her free time, Becky enjoys being outdoors, playing with her 2 dogs, or spending time with family. As a former hospice chaplain, she has found that there is beauty to be found in each and every day. Thank you so much, Becky, for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Cheryl. Appreciate it. Well, it's great to be here, and we're excited to do this again. So for those of you that are joining us again for the rescheduled date, we appreciate you coming back. We had some technical difficulty last time, and so we're excited to be back again. And for those of you that are maybe joining us for the first time, we're glad that this worked out for you too. So let me shift. There we go. Does that look okay on your end, Cheryl, for the presentation?
I had to unmute myself. Yes, it looks great. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for the warm introduction. And it is always a pleasure to get to work with Mid-Continent Public Library. I have been fortunate to partner with Cheryl and the library at different locations and on different topics, and also pertaining to different age groups. So talking tonight on this topic is something that is near and dear to my heart. Not only am I personally a parent of teenagers that are now growing into young adults before my eyes, but also in my 20 plus years of doing therapy, I have also worked with a lot of teenagers and young adults, and just walked with them and their parents going through that time of transition and change. And so some of you may be familiar, during the 2020 COVID pandemic, there really was a heightened awareness of some of the increased mental health needs for teenagers, and in particular, teens that were experiencing depression, anxiety, and even suicide rates being on the rise. And so with that as a backdrop in our mind, I really do think that this topic of equipping and coming around parents to help just really focus on what are some things that we can do starting at home to build a firm foundation, and also how can we navigate finding a point of connection whenever our teenagers are going through a lot of changes. So we're going to be covering that in our material tonight. And then certainly at the end, we'll also allow time for any personal questions that you might have. So without further ado, let me just give you a really quick overview of our layout for tonight. So we're going to go over just a little bit of an introduction, just why this topic is of importance. And then I want to talk through some of the unique interests and pressures that come for the teenage years. And with that, what are parenting goals? What are we trying to accomplish? And then we're going to talk about themes of communication and bridging the gap. And then we will wrap up with some role plays. I really think that when we bring it to life and when we talk about some real life situations, sometimes that helps us to relate a little bit differently. So first off here, I just really enjoyed this quote. Um, Teenagers test your patience, but they also teach you the true meaning of unconditional love. And boy, if that isn't the truth, so often we can reflect on it. It's relatively easy to love someone whenever they are agreeable or whenever they're seeing things from the same point of view. But it does test us whenever we have individuals, whether it's our children or otherwise, that maybe don't always agree or don't see it in the same way that we do. But being able to navigate that and come through that and reassure them that our love is constant can be meaningful for them and for us too. So teenagers may push you away, but they secretly yearn for your guidance and presence in their lives. And I really think that's true. And I want to just start out with that just at the beginning of our time together tonight, because oftentimes if we look at the face value words or actions that teenagers may say and do, we may wrongly interpret that they don't want us in their life or they don't want us close. And all too often, that may be either a sign of the times, some of that, like mom and dad are no longer cool. And so it may not be socially acceptable to act like they want to be around mom and dad. Or it might be hard for them to admit if they're feeling lonely or if they're feeling scared. But even if they're not coming right out to name those things, don't let them fool you. Teenagers need the constancy of our presence in those years more than ever. So I just put underneath there, parenting teens may certainly feel daunting, might feel like an overwhelming season, especially if you're parenting a teenager for the first time. While your child is likely spreading their wings and finding their own way, they also still find security in having a steady foundation from home. And so, if nothing else, one of the main takeaways that I really want to reiterate tonight is the importance of providing a constant, steady presence at home. When teenagers leave our home and they go out into the world, they're facing a lot of peer pressure. They're facing a lot of differing beliefs. They're facing people that are doing things in different ways. And so even if they don't outwardly show it, they are checking in at home to have those constant reminders of what you stand for as parents. So let's transition into talking about some common interests for our teenagers. So this is certainly not one size fits all. It's not cookie cutter because, as you know, each individual is unique. but there are some common interests that tend to surface during the teenage years. So just to go through these pretty quickly, social connections are huge. I put that at the top of the list on purpose. Um, no matter what our teenagers are facing as far as going through loss or grief, or there may be other things that are presenting hardship. But still, regardless, those social connections really tend to carry them through. So if you see a teenager that is prioritizing time with their friends, that is something that is not only very normal and very common, but also very healthy. They're trying to check out, where do I fit in? Where do I find common ground with others my age? Also, passions and hobbies. They're kind of finding themselves. Who am I? What makes me tick? What am I good at? What am I not good at? Personal well-being, for girls and boys, we can see an increased interest in things like fashion, skincare, um, being able to have positive body image. So if that means taking an interest in fitness or weightlifting, also, social media and technology, that certainly is on the rise during teenage years. That kind of goes back to that social connectedness, but we'll oftentimes see teens do that in a more digital way. Romantic relationships. We are tending to see this earlier and earlier in our culture, but certainly during the teen years, there can be an increased awareness of the opposite gender. And then social issues and activism. So teens really want to have a voice. A lot of times we're seeing teens take on more of a sense of autonomy and independence and figuring out, what do I believe? Not only the way that I was raised, but how do I feel about that as an individual? And so there's also an increased awareness of what's going on in the world around them during the teen years. And then our teens tend to face certain pressures that are unique during these years too. And so as parents, it's helpful for us to be aware not only of the stress or the pressures that we are feeling as grown-ups and as adults, but putting ourselves in their shoes. That as we think back to not only what we went through during our own teenage years, but also to think of, we're living in a changing world where some of those pressures may be similar to what we experienced, but some of those may be different too. So again, just to read through these with you, first off being mental health struggles. We are seeing a little bit of reduced stigma in that area, meaning it's becoming a little more socially acceptable for individuals to talk about mental health. And so things like "you matter" or "mental health matters," or "it is okay to speak out if you are struggling with depression, anxiety, sometimes even self-harm, like cutting or suicidal thoughts. I certainly have seen more kids or teens even talking with some of their peers about being in therapy. And so that could be a point of connection, especially if it is a peer group that there's more of a rapport or a connection there. Academic stress is a biggie. Um, Sometimes with this, kids may kind of go from one extreme to the other. They might be a teenager that is outwardly showing that they take their grades very seriously and they work hard. Or it could be the other end of that spectrum, and it might be a kiddo that either struggles academically and doesn't want to admit that, or it could be someone that maybe is bored or having a hard time concentrating. And so they might mask that to instead act like it's not cool to care about school. So a lot of times I will encourage asking probing questions. What are you good at? What's your favorite subject? What are the things that you're not good at? Or what would you like to do better in, to kind of try to get underneath if there's a little bit of a mask there covering that up. Also, there's a lot of pressure to fit in during the teenage years. And so, really, everybody tends to look for at least one person that they can connect with or that they feel like they have common ground with. And so, it can be a season where there's a lot of changes in friend groups. And so, that can mean that there's a lot of different pressures to find that new point of contact and a way of fitting in, that sense of belonging. Bullying is something that comes up frequently during the teen years or sometimes even younger. So with that, just really continuing to try to have open communication with your teenager, especially if you're seeing any changes in their behavior, if they're not wanting to go to school or if they're acting anxious whenever they talk about school. Sometimes that can also show up as more bodily somatic symptoms like stomach aches or headaches, especially when they're getting ready to go back into the school week. The negative impact of social media. So with that, things like comparison. How do I look compared to peers on social media? Or how many likes am I getting, or followers or friends? Also, it can set the stage for unrealistic expectations. Oftentimes on social media, we are seeing a very contrived image of another person's life. And so typically, we're not seeing the behind the scenes, we're not seeing a balance of good parts and bad parts of their daily life. So that may lead to a feeling of what's wrong with me, or why am I not good enough? Also, filters, body image can certainly impose teen pressures. So things like, a super clear complexion, or making someone look very thin, or like they have certain muscle tone, or that they are always around others. And all of that can be doctored up with filters and different digital programs now. Also, worries about the future for plans and success. A lot of times with teenagers, they may internalize that and act like they don't have a care in the world. But inside, they may be wondering what's coming next and how am I going to know what to do, what I'm supposed to do to navigate those next steps. Substance use, drugs and alcohol, there's certainly a lot of peer pressure there, pressure to be perfect or high achieving. Eating disorders, that ties in somewhat with issues related to body image, but also eating disorders can develop as a means of trying to have control over certain situations. So if you have a teenager that is feeling out of control with certain circumstances or things going on around them, they sometimes can compensate for that by controlling their eating in a more extreme way. Violence and threats. We live in a world that sadly we are seeing that on the rise, and it's becoming more pervasive in different settings. Political issues. Again, we're seeing this on the rise with a more polarized sense of extremes with political issues. And so that can feel confusing and stressful to teenagers that are trying to figure out their own beliefs. And so sometimes they might not understand, I don't really believe this extreme, but I don't really believe this extreme either. So what do I believe? So just making it safe to have some of those conversations. And then lastly, trying to find a sense of self. And that's a biggie for teens and really for all of us, but for a teen as they are transitioning out of younger childhood days and into teen and young adult days, they're really trying to figure out, who am I? What are the things that are my strengths? What are the things that I bring to the table in different friendships or academic settings? And also just helping them to recognize that they don't have to be good at everything, but that doesn't automatically mean that they don't have strengths or have assets. So I like to bring it together just to have a couple of basic themes to focus on. And really, when it boils down to it, teens are typically trying to resolve three big questions. And I think as parents or leaders, caregivers, these are really helpful to guide how we interact with our teenagers too. So they are focusing on, who am I? How do I feel about myself? And will I be okay in my future? So I'm going to pause there for a minute, that if you want to jot those down, I want to give you a second that you can do so. But just to expand on that a little bit, we need to feel a sense of security both internally and externally. So thinking about those first two questions, who am I? How do I feel about myself? Really, we want to help our teens to develop a secure internal locus of control, looking at, how do I feel about myself? If we don't have a strong sense of how we feel about ourselves, then it's kind of like a boat rocking on the waves in the water. Everything that we bump into in our external environment is going to have more influence on how we feel about ourselves if we are not rooted and grounded, at least in some of the basics. But then also externally, having a sense of security and a sense of control, or at least direction. Will I be okay in my future? And with anxiety, I always break it down into, anxiety tends to focus on not only fear or worry about the unknown, but also, secondly, a sense of, will I be competent to face the unknown? So, whatever comes up, we can't always control that, but increasing a sense of, I have tools, I have resources, I have skills, or I can be resourceful. I can turn to different people or organizations whenever I don't have all the answers myself. So teaching them that during the teenage years can start to build some of that paradigm. All right. So us as parents, we tend to have certain goals for the teenage years too, and some of us might be really aware of what those goals are, but more often than not, they might be a little more covert, meaning kind of subtle or hanging out under the surface. So I really liked the way that this was worded. This comes from the Center for Parent and Teen Communication, and this is the way that they explain parenting goals. So rules only count if they are followed. Young people only willingly follow rules that they know benefit them. And they tend to rebel against or ignore those that they resent or those that they see as meaningless. So we must strategically communicate with our tweens and teens so they clearly understand the meaning behind the boundaries that we set. We have to be clear that we set rules for two key reasons. First, to keep them safe, and second, to prepare them to navigate a world full of rules. Above all, we want our teens to understand we set limits because we care for and about them, and we want them to grasp that rules are designed to protect them and that we monitor them because we love them. So, I know that's a lot. Let me just highlight a few things. First and foremost, safety. That might seem like a very obvious ground rule, but I think speaking that to our teens lets them know I'm not setting these rules simply to make your life miserable or to try to control you, but rather it comes from a place of love and care and concern that we live in a world that is ever changing, and so we have to be proactive in order to keep them safe. Also, secondly, I really like that sense of preparing them. We are not doing them any favors by being overly permissive at this young age because we're setting them up for unrealistic expectations if we don't have certain rules and boundaries and kind of a sense of how far they can go before they bump up against that boundary of saying, that's far enough. So, understandably, even with explaining these things, that may not mean that your teenager just immediately comes around to being in agreement. But I always encourage parents, don't give up on giving them these reminders because oftentimes it's like planting seeds that they may be soaking it in more than they are outwardly showing you. And so going over with them the reason why you're implementing certain rules and then keeping it short and sweet. So a lot of times with kids and teenagers, we may have lots of thoughts in our mind as parents as to why we are setting certain rules. But the more succinct we can be in explaining that to them, the more likely they are to retain that and to carry it with them. Okay, so we're going to talk now about different themes to guide our communication as parents. And so, again, you heard me use the word earlier, having a paradigm. This kind of goes along with that. I think having certain structures, certain tried and true principles or programs can help us as parents to really think about how we want to approach a variety of situations. So if you think of a template, it's something that if you learn a certain structure, it's something that's usually fairly basic, fairly simple, and you can hold on to that in your mind, and then you can access that in a variety of situations to use it when you need it most. So the first one is love and logic. And so Love and Logic is a parenting program that has been around for a long time. And it is something that focuses on the importance of having balance between those two things. Looking at the difference between love, which is more nurturing and caring and reiterating to our teens and children that unconditional love, the fact that our love for them is not going to change based on their choices or anything they do. But then we also want to balance that with logic. And so in this parenting style, it's emphasizing the importance of discipline, having clear expectations, coming alongside that love with a consistent sense of this is what I expect from you. And if those expectations are not met, then this is the consequence that you will be facing. So with that, there's a sense of natural consequences. So by letting our children know ahead of time what that expectation is, even if we think they already know that, there is power in speaking that clearly and letting them know. So then ultimately it shifts some of that choice to them. Do you want to face this consequence? or do you not? And then, of course, as parents, the tricky part is following through consistently. So we want to make sure when we're telling our child this is the expectation and this is the correlated consequence if you don't meet that expectation, we want to be sure we're choosing something that we're prepared to follow through on. So, why might I say that? Well, as parents, we are human too. And so sometimes, whenever we are angry, or we are disappointed, or we are tired, then we might put certain consequences out there that are more an emotional reaction. So things like you're going to be grounded for the rest of the year, or you're never going to see your friends again. Those are more sweeping statements that tend to be more difficult to enforce. And so that can be something that inadvertently can work against this model. So really taking a moment to pause and to reflect before stating what that consequence is going to be. And it's okay if you need to sleep on it. If you need to say, this expectation was not met. And so we're going to need to talk tomorrow. But for tonight, let's both just sleep on it. And then we'll set up a time to talk about it tomorrow. And so it's okay to hit the pause button in order to avoid more of an emotional reaction, especially in those situations. So with love and logic, what I put here just as a brief overview, it is important to cultivate and maintain a genuine care and relationship alongside rules and expectations. And so Andy Stanley had a great quote on this that I think also shows why these things can pose issues whenever they are out of balance. So his quote here says, "A relationship without rules leads to chaos. Rules without a relationship leads to rebellion." So that is such a powerful quote. And I think it really shows why it's important to have both of those concepts working together. The second principle that I'm highlighting here related to themes of communication is the concept of healthy boundaries. And so with boundaries, we are trying to teach instead of punish. And so really thinking about, if that is our motive, how might we approach boundaries differently? So a lot of times we may, in a very simple sense, think of boundaries as simply saying no, you can't do that, or no, you can't go. And that's half of the equation, but the other half is thinking about, okay, so what might we want or allow in that situation? So I put an example here. I see you're having such a hard time staying off of your cell phone at night. Let's put it out in the main room at night. I'll put mine with yours too. That way we can all get enough sleep. So if we were to break that down, what is the part that we're saying no to? We're saying no to being on your cell phone at night. So, in other words, you could say, I don't want you to be on your cell phone at night. That would be fine to say that, but by looking at it as giving an alternative expectation too, you're not only enforcing that boundary, but you're also helping them by giving them a method, giving them a mode of doing that. And by showing a willingness to do that with your phone too, it's saying these rules apply to me as well. This is not just something that I am putting out there expecting it of you, but it's a realistic expectation. I can put that out there for myself too. Another way that I like to explain boundaries is by using these words, even to yourself. So thinking of, this is what I am willing to do. This is what I'm not willing to do. So thinking of that through a parenting lens. If your child is saying, I just met this new friend and they have invited me to spend the night. And so, in responding to that with a sense of this principle, using boundaries, you might think of, okay, this is what I am willing to do. Well, I am willing to have you go over and spend some time at their house tonight. But then the second part, this is what I'm not willing to do. I don't really know them or know their family that well yet, so I'm not ready for you to have a sleepover. So I need to have you home by 11 o'clock or whatever time you decide upon. If that's not something you're comfortable with, it could even be, I am comfortable with you meeting up at a restaurant or at a coffee shop or at a movie, but I'm not comfortable with you going over to their house. So thinking of, there might be times that you can yourself reflect on what would you be willing to do or comfortable doing, but then holding firm on what you are not willing to do. So, another concept that's really important when we're looking at parenting during the teen years is we want to try to look at ways to find common ground and common interest. And so, when we look at um, the things that are important to them and how we can look at these and say, okay, how can I find a common ground with them when they are looking at it from a very different point of view? So some of these things that we were talking about earlier that are common interests, if we are willing to have open conversations and honor their voice and their point of view and make it safe for them to have critical thinking on different topics. That encourages conversation not only in some of the smaller topics, but it may also set the ground for them to feel safe and to feel comfortable coming to you on bigger topics as well. So even if there are times within you that you are wanting to argue back or refute a certain point of view, it is okay to share with them your point of view, but it can be helpful to come alongside them in just trying to understand why they believe what they believe. And so, oftentimes during the teen years, it can be a very dynamic time where they might have very strong beliefs in one direction on one day, and then on another day have very different beliefs or at least a different angle on it. And so they are dynamic. They are rounding off the edges, so to speak, that they're taking in a lot of information and mulling it around and trying to think of how it impacts them and how it impacts the people that they do life with. So, some practical suggestions as far as what this might look like whenever we are trying to bridge that gap and find a point of connection with our teenagers. So first off here, just simply finding shared interests and activities. And quite truthfully, I encourage all parents to look at this as like a vehicle to spending time with them. So whatever you do, the actual activity is oftentimes less important than just finding time together. So that could be things like finding a TV series that you both like and watching it together, maybe making it fun and having a snack that they like or that you could make together while you watch that, playing a game together, visiting different food venues. So, like, that could be we're going to go visit all the different donut shops together and check them off our list as we go to each one, or a coffee shop or a pizza shop. So, whatever they like, and just making it into more of an ongoing activity. Or it could be something more hands-on, like starting a project together. Maybe that could be like decorating their room and creating like a vision board of different ideas for things they want to do in their room. And then maybe as budget allows, you can kind of chip away and do that little by little. Or maybe it's building something like a birdhouse or something to put outside that they can see something that they've made and take pride in that. But doing it together, and if applicable, even teaching them different skills in that can be good too. When you are talking, trying to diffuse the seriousness of it. Oftentimes, with teenagers, sitting face to face and maintaining eye contact can be a little bit overwhelming, a little bit too heavy for them. So, doing a parallel activity whenever you're talking can be really helpful. So, simply going on a walk or playing catch, going for a drive together while you're talking, or sometimes, even if you're in the same house, texting back and forth instead of talking. And that can diffuse the heaviness of that conversation. Also, using humor to keep it light. That can be hard sometimes as parents when we're aware of the seriousness of a topic or a conversation, but trying to keep it light and also trying to only focus on one topic at a time. Sometimes when we have lots of things on our mind, we can kind of come at our kids with everything but the kitchen sink, and it's a lot harder to have a productive conversation if they're feeling like we are coming down on them. So trying to focus on one topic at a time and trying to keep it light, trying to use a little bit of humor. Secondly, that kind of goes with that, breaking down our requests, avoiding that laundry list of things to do. And then, whenever we can, really trying to balance both concerns and areas of discipline with things that we do still genuinely see as their areas of success and areas of growth. So let me explain that one a little bit. I think at any age, one of the things that can sometimes happen whenever we're bringing up a concern to someone else is if we carry a lot of emotion surrounding that concern, we may even inadvertently word it in ways that may give that other person the idea that all we are seeing about them is that concern. And so, if they feel like that is not an accurate portrayal of who they really are, then they are more likely to feel defensive or to even shut down. And so, if instead we are able to have either a softened startup, like, I know you've been working really hard at your homework lately, and then transition into the concern. However, I've noticed your room is getting a little out of hand. I don't want that kind of science experiment growing in here. So I'm going to need you to, and then being really specific. Before you go out with friends on Friday night, I'm going to be coming in to check your room. So I need to see that everything's been put away and tidied up before you're allowed to go out with friends for the weekend. So it's letting them know, I see your hard work with school. I see you're really studying a lot, but this is still a concern. And so you can do that with other areas too, but by balancing that, they may still kind of roll their eyes, or it's not fun to have to clean up their room, but it's letting them know. I'm not saying you are a bad person. I'm saying you could make a different choice. You need to clean up your room. You need to follow through on the rules that I have set for you, or else there's going to be a consequence of not going out and having fun for the weekend. The next one here, as parents, we need to do different things to control our own emotions. And like you've heard me say throughout previous slides too, this can be difficult. There are times that we get upset. There are times that our kids know how to push our buttons, or they might say or do things in different situations that blatantly go against something that we have asked them to do. However, whenever we have a big reaction, instead of connecting with them, we tend to widen the divide. And so we're sending a message that it is me against you and making it feel like we're on different teams. Instead, we want to try to take some time to cool off, to understand the context of the situation and what has happened, and then decide how to proceed next. Now, that does not mean that we have to water down our rules or overly compromise whenever we are talking with them, but by trying to understand what might be contributing to some of their choices, we can give more of a feeling of empathy or support or compassion. So an example there might be, I didn't like the way you were talking to me when you came into the room. That's not acceptable. I'm guessing that you might be tired. This week you've had a lot going on and you've been up late most nights. And so I know for me, whenever I'm tired, I may act out of sorts. I may say and do things that I don't normally do. So why don't we look at what time you're getting to bed over the next few days to see if that helps you to regroup. But regardless, I need you to know it is not okay. It is not okay to use those words. So trying to really come alongside. It doesn't have to be saying it's okay for you to make certain choices, but it's looking at them as a whole person. And if we're having a hard time doing that, of course, it's okay to step away, pause, take a moment to regroup, and then come back whenever you're ready, whenever you're able. The next one there kind of groups in with that, with some of the examples that I was just using. So a little issue to you might be a big issue for someone else. And so as parents, that's a really good example of trying to put ourselves in their shoes. And so take time to understand, talk it over, and this can also help a lot in building trust with our child and with our teen. Okay, so as we're getting closer to the end here, I wanted to give you an overview of four different examples of parenting styles. And I'm curious as you're reading this or as you're looking this over, I'd like you to just be open and honest with yourself. Which one of these can you most relate to? And then which one do you think is healthiest and why? So the first one is authoritarian. So with this, it's words like you will do what I say. Why? Because I said so. So no room for talking about it or explaining or reflecting. Just a rule is a rule and you need to follow it. The second one there is a permissive style of parenting. So that could be something like, I really enjoy you. If you think of me as a friend, you will feel comfortable coming to me. I'll spend high quality time with you. And so I trust you to make your own decisions. The third one is disengaged style of parenting. So with this, it's kids will be kids. If they get into serious trouble, I will step in and get involved then. And then lastly is a balanced style of parenting. I love you. I'm not your friend. I'm your parent. And that's even better. I'll let you make your share of mistakes, but for the things that might affect your safety, you will do as I say. If I'm worried you're doing something inconsistent with your values, we will talk it through. So showing there, there are times that, of course, we can slip into any of those top three. But whenever we are looking at what are we aiming for as far as our style of parenting, that last one would be an example of a healthy approach. So with balanced parenting, kind of like thinking back to that love and logic approach, it's conveying to them that there is a constant foundation of love. And so, as a parent, we are there regardless of their choices. But also, the logic is we are not just going to let them blindly make choices on their own in every area. We're going to be like a guide that we are going to set forth certain expectations on the things that are non-negotiable, especially the things regarding safety. And then we're also going to be looking for if they get too far outside of certain parameters, we're going to check in. So kind of a silly example, but I think of when we go bowling. When my kids were little and we would go bowling, it was always kind of the question of whether or not we were going to put the bumpers down. And so there were times that we would not put the bumpers down. But whenever we kept getting gutter ball after gutter ball after gutter ball, then inevitably we'd go up to the desk and we'd put the bumpers down. And so it was a way of keeping our bowling ball down the middle of that lane so that we could try to perfect some of our bowling skills. And even though that's kind of a silly analogy, I think there's some parallels there with this concept of parenting in a balanced way. The ultimate goal would be helping them to get to the point that they don't need the bumpers. But there are times if we're seeing them continue to have gutter balls with some of their choices, that we may need to put the bumpers down again to give some checks and balances. And so doing that from a teaching mentality, but yet still coming alongside them. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to go through one or two of these scenarios, and then I want to make sure to allow time for question and answer. So the first one here with a role playing scenario, and then I want you just to think about which letter would most likely be your instinctive response, and then maybe also which one would you like to work towards, because again, we all have room to adapt and grow and change. So scenario number one, your teenager was told to come home by 11 p.m. They were going to attend a football game and get a burger with friends after the game. The clock hits 11:30 p.m. and your teenager has not come home or contacted you about where they are. They arrive home at 11:45 p.m. How do you respond? A, you begin yelling as they walk in the door. What were you thinking? Why are you late again? B, you ignore the behavior, hoping they do better next time, thinking kids will be kids. C, you ask them to state the agreed upon curfew, remind them of the expectations, and set a time in the morning to discuss the consequences after you both have gotten a good night's sleep. D, you are disappointed and you feel disrespected by your team. You tell them they always make mistakes and they make things harder at home. So feel free, if you want to, put whichever letter you can most relate to in the chat, or if that feels a little too on the spot, you certainly don't have to. You can just think about which one you would most likely be responding with. And honestly, with some of these, I think it can kind of be a combination. You know, sometimes we might start with one response and then we might come around with another response. And so that is okay too, quite honestly. You know, sometimes we may have a lot of emotion come out initially, especially like in this instance, if you have 45 minutes of waiting for them to get home past their curfew, but then you kind of regroup and take a few deep breaths. So what we're aiming for here is C, that you want to engage them in asking about what they thought the expectation was and clarifying the expectation, but then also giving yourself time to cool off and reset, and then following up in the morning. You skip over to one on this page. Okay. So scenario number 4 there. Your 16-year-old daughter comes downstairs ready for school wearing a short skirt that has previously been discussed as not appropriate to wear and not allowed. How do you respond? A, you immediately say, "No way. You are always trying to dress like your friends. What is wrong with you?" B, you look up, you notice your daughter's outfit, and you say, "You have 5 minutes until it's time to go. I need you to go change into something that is acceptable for school, or you are going to be late." C, you begin laying out your daughter's outfits each day and no longer give her the freedom to choose what to wear. D, you discuss consequences if there are ongoing power struggles around what to wear for school, such as not being allowed to drive herself to school and needing to ride the bus instead. So this one's a little bit tricky because I actually wove in, there's more than one there that could be a balanced response, a healthy response. So the two that I want to highlight are B and D. So both of those could be an example of balanced parenting. It's acknowledging that the rule stands and it's being concrete with your expectation. And so with B, the time frame of when she needs to change, or a natural consequence of she's going to be late. D, it's letting her know the expectation around consistently choosing what is appropriate to wear to school. And if those power struggles keep coming up, that there's going to be a consequence that she doesn't like as well. So not continuing to go through that repeatedly in the mornings, but really conveying, you know, this needs to stop, or if it doesn't, this is what's going to happen. So you guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up with an image here that I think is a great parallel for this whole season of parenting throughout the teenage years. So this is the image of a lighthouse. And when we are going through parenting teenagers, it can be a really hard balance because whenever we see a series of choices that are not wise choices, we may be tempted to come in and just take over and micromanage or not give any freedom or autonomy. But ultimately remembering that our goal for our teenagers is to equip them to be able to navigate in a world whenever they are not living under our roof or under our wings. So I like this image of being a lighthouse parent, that with that we let them learn from life's lessons, but we also guide them to navigate the world within safe and moral boundaries. And so with that, it's kind of like a little game of give and take. We're giving a little bit of freedom. We're seeing how they navigate their choices with that freedom based on clear expectations. And then, depending on how they decide, we either pull back a little bit or we give a little more freedom to work with. And some of that back and forth is really the name of the game with parenting during these years. And then the lighthouse of knowing that your constant love, your constant presence is going to be there as a foundation. So that is the end of my material that I have for you tonight, but I would love to open it up to you for any questions that you might have. You can either put them in the chat, or if you want to take yourself off of mute and ask the questions, that's fine too. I'll leave this slide up as we're doing that, so that if you want to jot down any of my contact information, you're welcome to reach out to me with any questions you have too.
Well, Becky, my teenager is turning 34 next week, so I I wish I had this presentation about 16 years ago.
Time flies, doesn't it?
Isn't it? Oh,
I know.
seems like yesterday.
Oh, absolutely. I hear you. Me too.
Well, if we don't have any questions tonight, I think we'll go ahead and call it an evening. I put the links to the survey in the chat, so hopefully our audience will have a chance to take the survey. And thank you, Becky, so much for your wonderful information. Like I said, I wish I'd had it 16 years ago.
My pleasure, Cheryl. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.